5 men were supposed to die that night. Instead, one did. Everyone called it a miracle. Everyone thanked me by name. Nobody could tell me the name of the man I let the train hit. There was no file for him, no badge number, no next of kin. My name's Nora Vance. I run the switchboard at Kestrel Junction, graveyard shift, 6 years in, and I make the calls nobody else wants to make. That night I made one, and it should have ended there. It didn't. 3 months later, I found out the man on the side track had never worked for this railway, not a single day of his life. The board doesn't warn you before it happens. You're sitting under fluorescent light, drinking coffee that stopped being hot an hour ago, and then every light on the panel for yard 3 flips red at once, all 4 rows, like the whole board just took a breath and held it. Nora, talk to me. Diane's voice cracked through the radio, sharp and flat, the way it went whenever a shift stopped being routine. Diane Kessler, my supervisor for 4 years running, the woman who signed off on every call I'd ever made at that board. Brake line failure on the 4471, I said, eyes on the screen. It's not slowing down. Main line's got the maintenance crew, 5 of them. I know what's on the main line, Diane. Sidetrack's clear. Sidetrack's not clear. I've got a heat signature on the spur, past the junction box. A pause stretched out longer than it should have. Confirm that. I looked twice. 1 yellow dot, 40 yards down the spur, holding perfectly still. Confirmed. 1 person, sidetrack, 5 on main. You've got maybe 11 seconds before that train hits the switch point. Can we get a voice warning down the spur? Anything? Negative. The PA on that stretch has been down since March. You know that. That's not enough time to clear either track. I know it isn't. Make the call, Nora. Book says I hold mainline priority unless I get a manual override. Then I'm giving you the override. Throw it. 11 seconds isn't long enough to think it through. It's long enough to act on whatever your hands already decided before your brain caught up. I threw the switch. The 4471 screamed off the main line and onto the spur, brakes finally biting somewhere in the middle of it, metal shrieking against metal for 4 full seconds before the train stopped, 4 feet short of 5 men frozen on the main line, not even looking at me, looking at the train that hadn't touched them. The spur went quiet fast, too quiet. Contact on the spur, I said into the radio, requesting EMS. Nobody answered right away. Diane, I need EMS on the spur, now. Copy. Sending crews. Another pause, longer this time. Sit tight, Nora. Don't leave the tower. I wasn't planning to. I mean it. Whatever you hear on this channel for the next hour, you stay at that board. I didn't leave. Dispatchers don't get to. Not even for that. I sat there for 40 minutes, listening to radio traffic about a body I never actually saw. Half of it clipped and coded in a way our normal EMS calls never were. And when Diane finally came back on, all she said was, "You did the right thing tonight, Nora. 5 for 1. Nobody's going to argue that math." Nobody did. Not for 3 months. Tomas Reyes caught the tail end of my shift that morning. The day dispatcher, a guy who'd covered for me twice when my car broke down and never once brought it up again. And he stood in the doorway of the tower with 2 coffees, handed me one, and didn't ask a single question. "You look like you need this more than sleep," he said. I need both." "Go home, Nora. The board's mine now." He glanced at the readout still glowing on my screen, the spur marked closed, and something crossed his face before he covered it. "They already scrubbed the spur log. That normal after an incident?" "I don't know," I said. "I've never had one." I didn't tell him about the dot that never moved, not once, in the whole 11 seconds before I threw the switch. I told myself it was shock keeping the man frozen. I wasn't ready yet to think it might have been something else. The 5 men from the crew wrote a letter to corporate. The company newsletter ran my name across the top of a story about the night I chose. One of them, a crew supervisor named Ray Delgado, showed up at the tower 2 weeks later with his wife and his 2 kids to shake my hand in person. "You gave my girls a father," Ray said, gripping my hand too hard, like letting go might undo it. "I don't know how you carry that weight, making a call like that in the time it takes to breathe." "I didn't have time to carry anything," I told him. "I just moved." His wife, Carla, hung back near the door with the younger girl on her hip. "He wakes up some nights, still hearing that brake line," she said. "Whatever you did up there, it bought us every morning since." "Still," Ray said, "still means something, what you did." His older daughter held up a drawing, a train with a smiley face on the front, and I took it, because there wasn't a version of that moment where I could hand it back. I hung it on the tower wall that same shift, right above the panel, where it stayed for the rest of my time there. "They tell you who it was?" Ray asked quietly, once Carla had herded the girls back toward the door. "The one on the spur?" "No, nobody told us either. Company said the family requested privacy." He shook his head slowly. "Feels wrong, somehow. Man dies, so my crew lives, and we can't even say his name at dinner." "I've been thinking the same thing." "You find out, you let me know. I'd like to send flowers somewhere, even if it's just a marker in a field." He shook my hand again on his way out, softer this time. "Doesn't sit right otherwise." It didn't sit right with me either, though it would take 3 more months before I understood exactly how much it shouldn't have. I never told him what it meant to sit across from a supervisor 3 days later and ask her a question she wouldn't answer straight. "Does it matter?" Diane said, when I finally asked her the dead man's name. "He's dead, Diane. I threw the switch that put a train on top of him." "It matters. His name's on the incident report. Look it up if you're that determined." "I want you to just tell me." "I want a lot of things too, Nora. Look it up." I looked it up. The report said unidentified individual, deceased, presumed transient, case referred to county coroner, no name, no photo, no file number connecting to anything real. 6 years at that board, and I'd logged every soul who ever crossed company track, vendors, inspectors, even the raccoons that tripped the sensors got a case number of their own. And the one man I'd made a life or death decision about in 11 seconds didn't exist anywhere, except in what I remembered of a yellow dot on a screen. I kept coming back to that dot. It never moved. Not a flinch, not a shift of weight. Nothing a person does when a freight train is bearing down on him in the dark. I told myself that was fear. Lying awake 3 nights running, I stopped believing it. I pulled the archived thermal footage on my last authorized shift before leave started, told myself it was just for my own peace of mind, nothing anybody would flag. The dot sat exactly where I remembered it, a clean orange blot against a cold blue background, radiating heat the way a body does, except a body radiates heat unevenly, warmer at the chest and skull, cooler at the extremities, a gradient any dispatcher learns to read without thinking about it after enough years on the board. This dot was flat, uniform, the same temperature from top to bottom, the whole 40 seconds it sat on my screen before the switch went. I ran it back 4 times before I let myself believe what I was seeing. A body doesn't glow like that. A heater does. The company gave me 2 mandatory weeks off after the incident, the kind where a counselor asks you to rate your feelings on a scale of 1 to 10, and you lie, because the real number won't fit anywhere on that scale. I spent most of it on my couch. I spent some of it calling my ex-husband, because he was the only person I knew who used to chase down things that didn't add up for a living. You're serious, Marcus said when I laid it out for him. My ex-husband, 2 years divorced, still the first number I called when something felt wrong. An old habit, 12 years of marriage, hadn't quite worn off. You want me to run down a man who officially doesn't exist? I want to know why he doesn't. Nora, I don't have a badge anymore. I can't pull half the records I used to. You've still got people who owe you favors. You told me that yourself. Last Thanksgiving, 3 drinks in. That's not fair. None of this is fair, Marcus. A man died on my watch, and there's no record he was ever born. He sighed the exact way he used to when I brought a case home from the tower instead of leaving it there. Except there wasn't any tower to leave this one at. Send me what you've got, all of it. And Nora, if this turns into something, you tell me before you do anything with it. Promise me that much. I promise. What I had was almost nothing. A timestamp, a location on the spur, a coroner's case number leading to a report stamped closed, no further action, cause of death listed as traumatic injury consistent with rail incident. 4 words doing the work of an entire investigation nobody had bothered to run. Marcus knew a woman at the county records office, a clerk named Priya Chandra, who'd helped him on cases back when he still had a badge to flash, and she agreed to meet us on her lunch break at a diner 2 blocks from the courthouse, sliding a manila folder across the table before either of us had ordered. This case bugged me the day it crossed my desk, Priya said, tapping the folder. Cause of death, sure. Manner of death, sure. But there's no intake form for the body itself. No weight, no height, no dental. Every other unidentified remains case in that drawer has a physical description a foot long. This one's got 4 lines and a stamp. Meaning what? I asked. Meaning somebody either processed a body so fast nobody had time to write anything down? Or... She stopped herself, glanced at Marcus like she wasn't sure how far she was allowed to go. Or there wasn't a body to process. That's a big leap from 4 missing lines, Marcus said. It's not the only file like it. Priya pulled a second folder from her bag, thinner than the first. I went looking after you called. Found this one from 6 years back. Different county line, same railway, same 4 lines, same stamp, same word, transient. Coroners don't usually reuse language that specific, unless somebody upstream is handing them a template. I sat with that a long moment before I trusted myself to speak. Somebody's writing the reports before the deaths happen. I didn't say that, Priya said, but I wouldn't rule it out either. Can you get me a name on the first case? I asked. The one from 6 years back? Priya shook her head slowly. Already tried. The intake officer who filed it retired to Arizona 2 years ago and isn't answering his old office line. Whoever's running this knows exactly which doors to leave locked. So we're stuck. I didn't say that either. She slid a business card across the table, plain, no title on it. I've got a friend in the State Transportation Board who audits rail incident reports for federal compliance. Slow process, and she won't talk to either of you directly. But she'll talk to me. How slow is slow? Weeks, not months, if she thinks it's worth her time. Priya looked at me for a long moment before she said the rest of it. You should know, if this is what it looks like, you're not just asking questions about a dead man anymore. You're asking questions about people who've made 4 other cases disappear without anyone noticing until now. That's not a small thing to hand somebody else to look into. I know. Do you, though? I didn't have an answer for that one. Not yet. I drove home from that diner with the radio off, windows up, going over every shift I'd worked under Diane since the day I started at Kestrel Junction, wondering how many of them I'd have to look at differently now. 6 years is a long time to trust somebody's voice in your ear during the worst 30 seconds of a night. It's a strange kind of grief, losing that trust after the fact, the way you might grieve a person who's still standing right in front of you. Marcus called 4 days later, and I heard it in his voice before he said a single word. That low, careful register he used to use right before he handed me something that would change how I saw a case, or a person, or 6 years of my own life all at once. The county morgue never received remains for that file, he said. No burial record, no cremation record, no release to next of kin, because there wasn't any next of kin to release to. Somebody closed a death case without ever moving a body into the system. That's not possible. I was there. I heard EMS on the radio. You heard radio traffic, Nora. You never saw a stretcher. He was right. I'd never seen a stretcher. Nobody had let me leave the tower, and by the end of my shift, the spur had already been cleared, cordoned, and reopened, swept clean, like the ground itself had agreed to forget. Diane was waiting by my car in the employee lot 3 days after that, which she'd never once done in 4 years. Heard you've been asking around, she said. I heard I made a decision that killed a man who apparently doesn't exist. Seemed worth a few questions. You made a decision that saved 5 lives. Hold on to that part, then give me his name. There isn't one to give you. Everybody has a name, Diane. Her jaw tightened, barely, the kind of small movement you'd only catch if you'd spent 4 years reading her face through every disaster the line had ever thrown at us. There wasn't a name to give you, Nora. There wasn't a person, not the way you're picturing one. What does that mean? She didn't answer. She got in her car and drove off, and I stood in that lot for 20 minutes, turning her sentence over. Because a woman who had never once dodged a straight question in 4 years had just told me, without quite saying it, that the dot on my screen that night had never been a man at all. I stopped sleeping properly after that. I kept replaying the 11 seconds, hunting for anything I might have missed the first time, a twitch, a stumble, the specific stillness of somebody too frightened to run, nothing. The longer I sat with it, the less that stillness looked like fear, and the more it looked like something arranged. I started checking the deadbolt on my apartment door twice before bed, then a third time, telling myself it was nothing, just a bad habit picked up from too many nights replaying a conversation in a parking lot. My phone buzzed once around midnight with a blocked number and no voicemail, and I sat staring at it for 10 minutes before I convinced myself it was a wrong number and not somebody letting me know they'd noticed how many questions I'd been asking. I didn't tell Marcus about the call. I didn't tell anyone. I just started parking under the streetlight instead of the shady spot near the stairwell, and I stopped mentioning Diane's name out loud in the apartment, as if the walls themselves might be listening for it. There was one more thing bothering me. Something I hadn't mentioned to Marcus yet because I hadn't trusted it enough to say out loud. Twice a month, sometimes more, a 6th car got coupled onto the last freight consist of the night. Unmarked, unlisted on the manifest I signed off on every morning, gone again before the day shift ever laid eyes on it. I'd asked a night crew hand about it once, years back, a man named Perez who worked the couplings. That's just a maintenance flat, Perez had told me, not quite meeting my eyes. Comes and goes, nothing worth logging. I'd believed that for 6 years. I stopped believing it the same week I stopped believing the man on the spur had ever been a man. Marcus dug further, off the books, the way he always did once a thread caught him, whether or not it was still his job to pull it. He called on a Sunday night, and I could hear him pacing on the other end. I found 3 other incidents on your line, he said. Going back 9 years, 3 other sidetrack diversions, 3 other unidentified individuals reported dead, 3 other coroner's files closed without a body ever touching the county morgue. 3 different dispatchers? 3 different dispatchers. 2 of them left the railway inside a year of their incident. The third one, he stopped. Marcus. The third one was a man named Walt Braddock. Died in a car accident 18 months after his own switch call, on a road he drove every single day, on a night he somehow didn't see coming. Single vehicle, no witnesses. Case closed in 4 days. That's fast for a fatal accident with no witnesses. It's fast for anything, Nora. No skid marks logged, no blood alcohol test ordered, which nobody skips, not even on an obvious single-car wreck. Investigating officer signed off on it that same afternoon and put in for retirement 6 weeks later. You think somebody paid him to close it? I think somebody didn't have to pay very much, because nobody questions a routine crash on a road a guy drove every day of his life. That's what makes it work. None of this looks unusual unless you already know to go looking for it. I don't like this, I said. Neither do I. I mean, I really don't like this, Nora. That's not a coincidence. That's a maintenance schedule. Somebody's been running the same play every 2 or 3 years, and every time, it's a dispatcher on your shift who ends up with their hand on that switch. Diane's been supervisor for every one of them, I said, before I could stop myself, the truth of it sitting in my chest for days already, too heavy to keep swallowing. All 4, mine included. Then you need to be very careful how you handle this. I know. I mean it, Nora. Walt Braddock didn't get careful. Walt Braddock's dead. I found Diane in the break room 2 nights later, and this time I didn't ask her a question. I told her what I knew, flat, the same way she'd always delivered bad news to me, because I wanted her to feel what it was like standing on the other side of that voice, for once. 4 dispatchers, I said, 4 sidetrack calls, 4 bodies that were never bodies. You were on shift for every single one, and there's a car on this line twice a month that doesn't exist on paper either. And Walt Braddock is dead. The fluorescent light did the same ugly thing to her face it had probably been doing to mine for 6 years straight. She didn't deny any of it. That was what finally broke something loose in me. She didn't even try. Sit down, Nora. I'll stand. Fine. Stand. She rubbed at her eyes, and for a second she looked less like my supervisor and more like a woman who'd been carrying something heavy for a very long time. You want to know what that spur actually carries some nights? Not people. Cargo that isn't supposed to exist on any manifest, moving through on cars nobody logs, for people who pay this railway more in one night than you clear in a year. Every couple of years, something threatens to go wrong enough to expose it. An inspection, a nosy conductor, a scale that doesn't balance. And we need a story big enough that nobody looks past it. A hero, a tragedy, a decision nobody in their right mind would ever want to second guess. So you build one. So we build one. A body that reads real enough on paper to close the question. A dispatcher who's good enough at her job to make the exact call we need made without ever needing to be told what to do. You didn't tell me what to do. I didn't have to. That's the entire design, Nora. You'd have thrown that switch with the same information no matter who was standing on that spur, because that's who you are. That's not a flaw in you. That's precisely why it had to be you and Walt Braddock. Was that a maintenance schedule too? For the first time in 4 years, Diane looked away from me first. That's not a conversation I'm having in a break room. Then where, Diane? Because I'm done getting half a sentence at a time. Nowhere. There isn't a version of this conversation that ends with you satisfied and both of us still walking around free. That's not an answer. It's the only one I've got left to give you. Diane exhaled slowly and leaned back against the vending machine, arms crossed, studying me like she was recalculating something. There's a shift supervisor position opening at the Millbrook Yard next month. Better hours, real money, a title that looks good on a resume for the rest of your life. I could put your name on it tomorrow. You're offering me a promotion. I'm offering you a reason to stop asking questions that don't have safe answers. And if I say no, then you say no. And you go back to running a board same as always. And none of this ever happened between us tonight. Diane's voice dropped, quieter than I'd ever heard it. I'm not threatening you, Nora. I've buried enough people who thought they heard a threat where there wasn't one, and it never ends the way they think it will. I'm telling you the truth, which is that the smartest thing you can do right now is decide how much of this you actually want to know. I already know too much to unknow it. That's the only part of tonight I actually believe. I quit 11 days later. Human Resources asked me, twice, whether anything had happened that I wanted to report before I signed the paperwork. Nothing you need on file, I told the woman across the desk, and she nodded like she'd heard that exact sentence from someone else before, though I couldn't have said why I thought that. Personal reasons, then. That's what I'll put down. Put down whatever you want. It won't be wrong. Diane signed my separation form without a word, without looking up. And that was the last time I ever saw her handwriting. Tomas walked me out to my car on my last morning, same as he had after every rough shift, 2 coffees in hand out of habit, even though there wasn't a board waiting for either of us anymore that day. You're not going to tell me what this is really about, are you? He said, not a question. No. Okay. He handed me the coffee anyway. For what it's worth, that kid's drawing's still up on the wall. Nobody's taken it down. Leave it up. Wasn't planning on touching it. He looked at me a second longer than the moment needed. Be careful out there, Nora. Whatever it is. I will. He didn't ask again. I've thought about that more than once since how the people who trust you the most are sometimes the ones who ask the fewest questions. I didn't report her, not to corporate, not to the police. Marcus asked me twice why not, and I still don't have a clean answer, beyond the fact that I've read enough about what happens to people who blow the whistle on freight lines, moving things nobody wants named, and I have a mother 2 counties over and a face people still recognize from a newsletter headline. I took a dispatcher job 2 states away instead, a smaller yard, slower nights, a board that has never once lit up red at 3 in the morning the way Kestrel Junctions did. Ray Delgado still sends a Christmas card every year. Same address, never fails, signed by his whole family, thanking me for a thing he still believes I did on purpose, with my eyes open, knowing exactly whose life sat on each side of that switch. I keep every card in a drawer I don't open often. Some nights, when a board goes quiet and the coffee's gone cold the way it always does by 2 a.m., I think about that yellow dot, motionless on the spur, before I ever touch the switch, and I wonder whose decision it really was that night, mine, or one that had already been made for me long before I ever sat down at that board. I never did find out what was riding in that 6th car, not really. Not in any way I could prove in a courtroom or a report or anything else with my name attached to it. Priya's contact at the State Transportation Board pulled the 4 incident files 8 months later, quietly, and flagged them for review. Not enough to bring anyone down, Marcus said, but enough that a second 6th car hasn't run through Kestrel Junction since, at least not one anybody's spotted. Diane took a transfer out of state before the flags went in. I don't know where. I told myself I didn't want to know, and mostly, on most nights, that's true. Marcus still calls sometimes with a new thread, a name that surfaces in a filing somewhere, a rumor about another junction 3 states south with the same quiet pattern of heroes and unmarked cars. There's a dispatcher out there, he told me last month, young guy, 2 years on the job, Just got written up in his company newsletter for a hero call on a sidetrack. Same wording as yours, almost word for word. Same coroner's language on the case file. Does he know? Doesn't sound like it. Not yet. I sat with the phone against my ear a long time before I answered, thinking about a yellow dot that never moved. A drawing of a smiling train still folded in a drawer 2 states behind me. A woman who'd looked away from me first for the only time in 4 years. Send me what you've got, I finally said. All of it. Huh. I still haven't decided whether that's the right call, or just the only one I know how to make. I still hang the drawing of the smiling train above my board, wherever I end up working. New yard, new city, same faded crayon lines. Some nights a coworker asks who drew it, and I tell them the truth. A little girl whose father I saved, and let them assume that's the whole story. Because most nights, that's easier than the rest of it. I don't know if Ray Delgado ever stopped wondering about the name he never got. I know I haven't.